Okay, thank you very much. I'm Mateusz Felczak. I'm from the University in Krakow, as was said, and today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about cannibals. But first of all, a few disclaimers are, I guess, needed. So first of all, in this research I looked only at RPGs and also a selected few of them. The second disclaimer is that I'm not really interested in something that I would call token cannibalism, that is like reskinning monsters and just labeling them as cannibals without any background or any like additional, I would say, thought from the designer's perspective. They are of course a potentially interesting topic, but I'm postponing it for the sake of this presentation. And the third disclaimer, we have the usual one. This is kind of a work in progress, so if you have any, of course, comments or additional examples that I haven't stumbled upon or analyzed in this research, please feel free to tell me so. Okay, so first of all, what is cannibalism? So, well, I guess we all know intuitively what it stands for. It's basically eating representatives of all species, so to speak, and it's widely used to kind of signpost the otherness, and also to establish a border between the civilized cultures and the savage cultures. So if someone is labeled as a cannibal, we can pinpoint him or her to the savage category, so to speak. And cannibalism is quite I would say popular topic recently when it comes to cultural studies, the cannibal studies, and today I would like to build on one distinction borrowed from the cannibal studies. That is the distinction between the figure of a cannibal and the figure of anthropophag. And the difference is quite simple. The cannibalism is a colonial term for eating human flesh, and the anthropophagy is a cultural practice with a powerful discursive potential, potentially powerful. Okay, and they are somehow connected with achieving an ultimate power fantasy of devouring someone else and obtaining his or her power. Okay. So, why power and knowledge? So, albeit the titular concepts of power and knowledge have been used extensively in the works of Michel Foucault, as we probably all are aware of. These two concepts also appear as kind of discursive underpinnings of a colonial narrative, which was famously described by Edward Said in one of the first instances of this. And of course, the figures of power and knowledge are, even as Foucault understood them, they have their own history, and they kind of form the scaffolding of a broader colonial project. And quoting James Balfour from his House of Commons lecture on the British presence in Egypt, Edward Said said that, of course, not Edward Said, sorry, James Balfour said that we know the civilization of Egypt better than we know the civilization of any other country. We know it further back, we know it more intimately, we know more about it. Said comments on this passage saying that the power and knowledge are intertwined and work in favor of the colonizer. Knowledge means basically rising above immediacy, beyond self, into the foreign and into the distant. And thus, to have such a knowledge of such a thing is to dominate it and to have authority over it. So it's a kind of a discursive practice of achieving some level of power over something. And when we know that something and this something exists, then for us, in a sense, as we know it. So I would argue that this is also very much true in terms of the video games that I analyzed here. That the knowledge actively shapes perception of the objects that we stumble upon video games. So of course, as I said in this presentation, I will focus only on selected cases here to kind of illustrate my point rather than providing an exhaustive vocabulary of cannibalism in RPGs even. Okay, so the first one, the problem of distinction. Yeah, these are the screens from the first Witcher game. So the first problem is how to spot a cannibal, how to identify a cannibal. So in the first Witcher, it's quite obvious. So protagonist sees a hut, notices human meat, and the quest automatically gets its name. I think you cannot really see it. I'm sorry for the bad quality, but it says new quest, the cannibal. Yeah. And then Geralt asks, "What reasons might a cannibal have?" Yeah, this is the part of the conversation that you can see. And the answer is, well, there's no need to be agitated. Maybe you'd like something to eat. So the cannibal, as the other, is an obvious trespasser and a criminal. It must be disposed of accordingly. Whereas in Heart of Stone, one of the DLCs for the Witcher 3, there's a quest named Without a Trace. And the player in this quest has to discover that a secluded couple of elderly people are actually cannibals. But there is no obvious signposting for that in the game. However, I'd like to point out a potentially interesting evolution of the cannibal trope from the Witcher, from the first Witcher to the Witcher 3 DLC. So the significance of background information that's we can find in the narrative. So in Heart of Stone quest, the couple present themselves as kind of being excluded from the economic development of the realm. Yeah, as you can hopefully read. That's actually on the second slide. Yeah, that they are too frail, too old, to plow and sow. So they are basically unable to perform the standard peasant's work because the economic development denies them the traditional help offered through the multi-generational family model, because as you can see, all the young people went off to the city seeking employment. So cannibals are, in a sense, defeating values which can be considered conservative. They refuse to abandon their old lifestyles, and even though they cannot stick to the traditional peasants' chores like plowing and sowing, they also refuse to hunt for the game because, as we know, the poaching would equal stealing from the lord of the land, and would automatically mean trespassing the law. So their cannibalism, instead of trespassing the official law, trespasses the natural law. This is one of the distinctions made in the seminal works in cannibal studies by Kathleen Avramescu when he sees this distinction between the trespasser of the natural law and the trespasser of the official law, a kind of key to forming the cannibal subject. And this whole situation also gets a bit convoluted by the quest's multi-layered nature. So it is easy to prove from the gameplay standpoint that the couple are cannibals, but quite hard to prove that they are murderers. Hence, the interesting, I guess, player discussion. I don't have much time to elaborate on it. That's also not the main point of the talk. But I would like just to point one perhaps interesting fact. my favorite last part of the sentence, in which the player suggests that that the couple must have engaged in some shady activity because they're simply of too high level. Yeah, that's one of the justification for violence, yeah, through this cannibal trope. So the bottom line of this example from the Witcher series, well, tells the story of an evolution of the cannibal trope. Yeah, from just a justification of pure violence to the more nuanced approach displayed in Heart of Stone, where the cannibals become anthropophagi because they are compelled to eat the human flesh by, well, external circumstances. That is the rules of the game, yeah, the rules of the world that they inhabit. And by doing so, they sort of point the way for the player. Yeah? They incentivize players to actively look for transgressions of the law, which bear the promise of some sort of empowerment, or at least survival. Okay. And moving to the next example, well, I'd like to continue the themes linking cannibalism with colonial and economic discourses. In the Elder Scrolls Skyrim, yeah, there's a quest, the Taste of Death. I believe that during the 2017 Six Monstrosity workshop, there was one presentation concerning this particular example, but it was from the perspective of players' reaction to the gruesome aspect of cannibalism, which I will completely omit here. So, here I would like just to point out some perhaps interesting background regarding this particular usage of cannibal tropes. So, in the Taste of Death is set in Markarth, which is at the time of the game's narrative inhabited by Nords. But in fact, it remains quite rare example of an ancient above-ground settlement of the Dwemer civilization. So its main riches are silver mines and jewelry trade. It is a city entirely built on wealth of an ancient civilization, which is no more, yeah, the Dwemers. And its current dwellers are basically kind of capitalizing on something that was previously acquired, yeah, previously established. And so, in the quest, we are exploring a cannibalistic cult, and the quest starts with complaints that someone is desecrating, that is eating corpses of the nobles, and it turns out that that in order to progress with the quest, we have to sacrifice the local priest. Yeah, as you can see probably, who is in charge of the tombs to the cannibalistic cult worshipping the goddess Namira. And I'd like to point out just a few possible interpretations regarding this quest. So first, the cannibals here are used to kind of subvert the, well, quasi-colonial narrative, and at the same time are vehemently anti-capitalistic. So they disrupt the local hierarchy based on the exploitation of natural resources. They gradually exposes the greediness of local elites. So they gradually get rid of people in power. The priest can be, of course, bribed and so on. The cult also establishes a kind of alternative social structure with figures like, as you can see on the screen, local butcher, bartender, and kennel supervisor, as those who are the knowing insiders. So this approach comes close to the, well, famous modernist anthropophagi movement, represented famously by the works of Oswald de Andrade, Manifesto Antropophago, which criticizes the naive, romanticized image of an indigenous person, introducing in its place an anthropophag, someone that consciously and purposefully digests the hostile elements of the colonial culture. And the connection between capitalism, cannibalism, and, well, colonial mimicry, kind of in the spirit of Homi Bhabha. Yeah, so the mimicry later developed in his work into hybridity, is this approach that the colonized will seemingly accept the narrative of the colonizer, but they subvert it, and also in some subversive ways. So they kind of throw back, the image of themselves which was imposed on them. So that I would argue is very, very, very much the case here. And this particular argument is further strengthened by the mythology concerning the cannibalistic goddess Nemira that I've just mentioned, and the fact that, as we can read in one of the Skyrim's books, her sort of blessings were received by a person who had a successful career as a beggar, and these blessings are disease, pity, and disregard. So, to cut long story short, basically Namira's blessings made a beggar such a compelling figure in this society that people were, they feel obliged to throw large sums of money at this beggar. Okay. This trope in the taste of death is that players, in order to gain the true knowledge of what is actually happening in Markarth and where lies the true source of power controlling the economic flow of the city, have no choice but to follow the cannibalistic path and actively engage in the ritual of flesh consumption. In order to kind of uncover this whole narrative, the players have to become cannibals themselves. So continuing kind of this line of thought, I'd now explore more, let's say, intrinsic, as I believe, connection between the knowledgeable empowerment, violence, and cannibalism, and it concerns artifacts and trade. And this section will also deal with cannibalism as game mechanics. So, commenting on 19th century colonial curio shops trade, Gananat Obeysekere, in his words, writes that the European desire for body parts of savages was rooted in much broader and deeper concerns. Like the Maori artifacts, body parts were collected by ship's personnel, officially for museums and patrons, and also unofficially for sale in metropolitan capital. So the Obeysekere argument is basically that that it was the European colonizers' discourse that produced the figure of a cannibal. And kind of to meet the economic demands for body parts, some Maori tribes started engaging in the literal headhunting and practices resembling cannibalism. And they did so not because they were, of course, naturally inclined towards such activities, but to accommodate the European need for artifacts made of human body parts, plainly and simply. So I'd say that this notion of producing the desired effect is quite close to the cannibalism introduced as game mechanics in modern RPGs, or at least it bears some resemblance. So when player characters use cannibals, it becomes just another method of maintaining health pool. Sometimes, like in the fourth Fallout, the companions would even comment on it, suggesting that cannibalism does not supposed to work the way that it is represented in the game. When it's stripped from its cultural signifiers, it becomes just something to make fun of. That's why these comments are also designed to make us laugh, because they kind of reveal this awkward moments in game mechanic. That's how most the so-called cannibal perks work in RPGs, I would say. Of course, there's also this recurring trope of vampire-like cannibal borrowed from the Gothic literature, which signifies the power of nobility to literally consume those of lower social and economic stance. Sometimes, as you can see in the screenshot from the Baldur's Gate 2 Enhanced Edition, this trope incentivizes some, not so sophisticated language art humor, as in the second dialogue option here. So, in other words, players become cannibals because games present tangible benefits tied to the very act of cannibalism, but without all the consequences and implications of it. Nevertheless, the aforementioned colonial curio shop artifact usage remains well-rooted in the game mechanics. I'll provide just one example of it. Pillars of Eternity lets us keep the skull of a powerful lich-like magician and place it in the inventory space reserved for cosmetic animal companions, like this giant miniature space piglet here. So it takes kind of the two boxes at once. Yeah, there's a cosmetic item. It has aesthetic value. Of I guess fetishistic, cannibalistic origin, and it has its uses. Yeah, thanks to its power, we can summon the spirit of a lich. Moving to the last example. Talking about cannibalism in relation to traditions and social strata, there is also an interesting cannibalistic cult in Torment, Tides of Numenera. In the first major city hub of the game, the cannibalistic cult named Dengrauhur is working closely with the official disciplinary and punitive system. They have essentially, representatives of this cult, they have two kinds of responsibilities. First, they eat human flesh to preserve the knowledge possessed by the, mostly deceased individuals, but they also do so through the mediation of the special suits, which separate the useless remains from the valuable parts. Their second duty is to eat the remains of those sentenced to death. This is performed by the so-called devourer of wrongs, member of the Dendra cult, and his or her, we don't know because he or her wears a mask. Names come from the fact that he or she literally eats the thoughts of convicts after they shape into human flesh. So at first glance it seems that the game's narrative attempts to alleviate the repulsion towards the cannibals that players might feel when engaging with this knowledgeable cannibalistic cult, but I would argue that it's not entirely the case here. Cannibalism, which is that strongly tied to the preservation of hierarchy and knowledge, only further strengthens the alienating potential of cannibalism. Yeah? The double alienation comes through the selection of flesh to consume, because not all are worthy of presenting their knowledge, they use this knowledge to kind of fossilize the official punitive system, as Dendra members are responsible for disposition of the corpses of the criminals. So, in other words, I'm coming to the conclusion. The so-called valuable cannibals will teach players two things. So first, that violence is necessary for the successful transition of culture, and the second, that it's necessary for the players to kind of assist in this process, to help in this process. So anthropophagy kind of justifies the fact that all subjects are subjugated to the law established by the player's character, and cannibal traits are used to rationalize violence towards the unknown, and both of them work towards establishing the figure of a player as a colonizer, as someone who can exert freely the power to discipline and punish. Thank you very much, and sorry for going slightly over time.
I guess we have around 5 minutes for questions.
Hi, thanks for the talk. This is not a very deep question, but I was thinking about Witcher 3 and the way in which, like, when you kill monsters, you get certain loot that is in some ways kind of magical, or it can be used in alchemy or whatever. But when you kill people, you only get their equipment, and I kind of wonder, what do you think says about cannibalism or something.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of interesting because even in modern RPGs that I've played recently that implement the cannibal perk, like for example Pillars of Eternity, the second, the Deathfire that I've played for the sake of my next presentation during this triple conference. Even when I have the Man-Eater perk, it doesn't really change much. I mean, there is no like tangible representation of human meat in game. I just point to the some pixels lying on the ground, and there's like animation indicating that my character is eating something. Yeah. So, but. I would like maybe it would be interesting to see which food in RPGs gains is used to gain what kind of bonuses. For example, I'll just stick to the pillars example because I know it well. We have after chopping down dragon, we have dragon meat, and a meat represents the statistic responsible for might. Whereas when you eat a vegetarian dish, you can cook your own vegetarian dish, of course. You gain, I think, mainly perception and agility. There's like no really like logic connection between. Of course, there is like cultural connection. You can trace it in some literary sources, but otherwise there is none. So yeah.
Maybe this is a tenuous connection I'm drawing, but do you see any link or overlap, between the image of the cannibal that you presented here and the image of the zombie?
Yeah, that's a tricky question because this zombie theme gets, I would say, a bit convoluted because it doesn't really. Okay, I would say first of all, I would say that the cannibal theme sticks more to its roots. Like I would say, in terms of historic recordings of European colonization. Like we can, I would do it tomorrow, but we can pinpoint to some very concrete sources. For example, written by Jesuits who were missionaries, and we can see how their description of cannibalism actually fits what happens in games in terms of cannibalism, or in terms how cannibal is being portrayed. Whereas when we look at the zombies in this regard, I'm not an expert in this field, but I would say there is not that precise overlap. I would say that they are slightly different, and they are a bit more. There's a bit more into it. Yeah.
Okay, we have time for one short question.
And that would be about relation between cannibalistic practices and secret cults and open religions within this colonial framework. Of course, the first thought would lead me toward the monstrosity of the flesh of the Christ devoured by Catholics. But it seems striking that it is almost always, beside this Witcher example, it's always framed as a cult practice, not as a necessity or a delicacy. Why is that so?
Yeah, that's a difficult, multi-layered question, of course. But the shortest answer is I don't know yet. But the longer answer would be that perhaps may be found in historic accounts of Catholic and Catholic missionaries trying to introduce the Christianity to the people that already have cannibalism kind of intertwined in their cultural heritage, and I would say that at first stumbled upon fierce resistance, because it was those who are consumed are not supposed to live, because you are supposed to live instead of them. Yeah? If you consume them, then how it is so that we consume this Christ all in all, repeatedly, and allegedly he still lives somewhere. Like that just doesn't make any sense. So but that still doesn't answer your question. That's just my personal music. So yeah,
Okay.
I'll end.
I'm afraid we have no time.